What's up guys, Andre here, and today I'd like to show you how we can integrate PayPal checkout in a Laravel app. PayPal is probably the most recognized online payment gateway, and if you do any sort of online business, it's probably a good idea to accept it as payment. Now, unfortunately, PayPal does not have the greatest reputation in the developer community. It's known for confusing docs and buggy APIs, which I have actually experienced when I was trying to work with it. Nonetheless, let's try to power through them and build an app. So there are a few packages and tutorials out there, but most of the ones that I found are still using PayPal Express, which is PayPal's previous version of its API, which is now deprecated. It still works, but I wanted to do a tutorial on the latest API. So I actually took a look at this one, and I actually went through it and pretty much had the app done, but I realized it was using the old version. So if you take a look at the Express docs, you can see right here, it says it's deprecated out of this date. So I scrapped everything and started to work on the new API, which is called checkout. Okay, so let's get started. First of all, you have to have a PayPal account, obviously. Then you have to log into developer.paypal.com. And I believe you're going to have a PayPal business account to accept payments. So you can just upgrade your current account. It's free, and you have the option to either combine your accounts or make a separate business account. I personally just combined mine. And after that, you can log in. Let me log in here. It's going to log in. And next, you're going to want to make sure that you have sandbox accounts. So if you go here to sandbox, and if you don't have any, make sure you make two. You have to have one for personal and one for business. And sandbox accounts are exactly as they sound. They allow you to test your application before it is made available in production. So you have an entire sandbox you can play with as if it were a real PayPal account. So for example, if I copy this, this is the personal sandbox account. If I go to sandbox.paypal.com, and it looks just like PayPal, so don't confuse them. If you log in, just paste that in, then you can see all the test accounts that I have here. And as we make payments, we can see the transactions go here, and you can see the balance go down as well. And same deal for the seller account. So make sure you have your sandbox accounts set up. And actually before that or after that, you also want to make sure you have, actually let's go into my apps. You want to make sure you have a REST API. And this is what we'll be using to interact with PayPal's API. And this will give you some secret and some client keys as well, so we can use the API. I think when you create this, you get a sandbox account automatically, but I don't remember what happened. So just make sure you have those two things, sandbox and the REST API. So yeah, the purpose of this video is just to give you a sense of how the auth flow and how the API works. I'm just going to dump the code in a routes file so we can play around, so the code won't exactly be the cleanest. In the next video, we'll take a look at implementing the API in a more real-world application in my e-commerce series. Okay, so let's get started. Let's go into the checkout docs and see what's going on here. Okay, so if you scroll down, you'll see that the integration options, there are two ways to integrate them, or two ways we'll be looking at. There's client integration, which is the easiest way, and this will embed a PayPal checkout button and take you to PayPal's auth system, and then will verify all the payments for you. This, like it states, will never hit your web server. It will only hit the client. So for applications and use cases that don't require a web server, this is great. For example, if you just want to accept donations, you can just use this way. And the other way we'll be looking at is server integration, where your server sits in the middle and allows you to make calls to the PayPal API. But the advantage of this is you can interact with your web server for whatever you want to do. For example, if you wanted to add it to an orders table or manipulate your database, then this is the way to go. Okay, so let's start with client integration. And here is an example. So that's what I was just trying to explain. It's just from your browser straight to the PayPal server, and your web server is not there. Okay. So yeah, let's just grab this and let's just paste this into our own Laravel app. And we have to replace this sandbox ID with our own ID. So I have a Laravel app here. It's bare bones. I didn't do anything to it. So let's just use the welcome.blade.php and let's just remove all of this stuff. Don't need this. And let's remove this. And let's just put everything in here. So yeah, let's just paste it in here. And I'm going to take this PayPal button. That's where the PayPal button is going to go. I'm going to put it in here so it renders in the middle of the page because there's CSS set up for that already. And let's grab our client ID. So we'll just be working with the sandbox. Obviously, if you were making this live, you would put this in production with the production key. So back here, here where you make your REST client, here. This is where you get your API. So I'm going to do this one. And we're going to need the client ID, but later on we need the secret ID too when we do the server integration. This is fine for now. Paste that in. And that's literally it. Let's take a look. Fresh. And there's that button. I think there's an option to make the button bigger. So right here. I think it's large, maybe. Okay, so there you go. And if we click this, it takes us to PayPal in a new window. So the old API would bring you to a brand new page. So this is a bit of an improvement so the user doesn't get confused. And this is our sandbox account. Since I'm already logged in, let me just show you. I'm going to log out just to show you. Okay, let's start from scratch. Let me close this. Open it again, and it should bring you to this login screen. And I can log in with my test buyer account. Okay, so these are all my options to pay because this is what the sandbox account has. It has normal PayPal balance, has a Visa, and it has a bank account. So we can just continue. And we can continue again. And that's it. So as you can see, there's an alert here. And let's just go through the code. So payment is the function that is run that takes you to PayPal site and grabs all the information from the user that logs into their account. And you also pass it the currency and a few other options like the button size. And this is all in the docs. That's not too hard to find. So after this completes, the payment has not gone through yet. This is the function that gets called. And this is the function you have to call in order for the payment to come through. And we'll take a look at this in more depth when we do the server integration. So yeah, if we take a look at our sandbox, and you can add some JavaScript to change the page to say that the payment went through. But if we go here and I refresh the page, actually it's not instant for whatever reason. So this is kind of confusing. In my experience, it takes like 5 minutes for it to show up, but this should go down by 1 cent because that's what we were charged. This is instant, but these are not instant. It takes like 5 minutes, but we'll see. So yeah, that hasn't gone through yet. I'll give it a few minutes and see if it's gone through just to prove to you that it worked.
A few moments later.
Okay, so it's been about 2 minutes and you can see the transaction went through right there and we're charged 1 cent because that's what we specified in here. So yeah, that's basically the client-side integration. There's options, but we'll take a look at the options when we do the server-side integration, which we will do now. All right, so let's go back into the docs. And now let's take a look at server-side integration. So it's the same thing. Well, not the same thing, but if you look at the diagram here, you'll see that now our server sits in between here, and our server is now responsible for calling the API, and the API will return to our server, which we can do whatever we want, like add the order to the orders table or whatever our app needs. So yeah, the code looks similar, and the example here is what we'll use. So I'm going to grab this. This is still the client. So this is still in our browser. So in our case, it's just going to be in here in the welcome page. And I'm just going to delete this. Don't need this anymore. Actually, let me just comment it out so I can grab the key. Actually, we don't need the key because that's going to go in our server. So let me just grab this code and space that in. And let's take a look at what's going on. Okay, so now here is where we have to make a call to our own backend. And this endpoint will be responsible for calling the PayPal API. So we have to make an endpoint here and here on authorize. Okay, so when we call this, it's going to return a token or a token ID, or what they name it is a payment ID. And what that payment ID has is all the information that's come back after the user logs in to their PayPal account. And after we do that, then we can make another call to our server at this endpoint, and this will be responsible for executing the payment. And we have to pass in the payment ID, which we get from here, and the payer ID, which we also get from here. So if we go back to the example, they are using a node here. So this is the client side, which we have already. And here, this is an example of the server side code, but they are using node. It's pretty easy to understand, actually. They're just directly integrating the PayPal REST API. If you see here, they're posting to this endpoint, which is the REST API, and passing in the client and the secret. And then here's the execution part where they actually execute the payment. And again, they're just making use of the REST API. And we can totally do that as well if we wanted to. We can just make use of a package like Guzzle to make HTTP requests. Or you can use an SDK, which is a wrapper around the API. And that's what we'll do here. So they have one for PHP. It's not specific to Laravel, but we can just use it. So let's go ahead and use this. Actually, before I get to this, let's make endpoints here for these two, for creating payment and for executing the payment. So I'm going to do /API because we're going to use the routes API create payment, and we don't need this trailing slash. Let's do the same thing here and execute payment. And let's go ahead and make these in our routes API. You can put it in web too, but it's better to put it in here because you don't have to deal with all the CSRF tokens. So let's just make these two. And they are post requests, as you see here. So let's do that. And like I said, I'm just going to dump it in a closure. But if this were real, you should put in a controller. So route, and it should be a post request. And what was it called? It was called create payment and execute payment. So let's make one for create payment. And let's do one for execute payment as well. So I'm just going to do that. Change this to execute. And here we're going to need the request because we're passing in data here. So let me just do that and let's import that. Okay. And let's just return to make sure create payment working. Let's just make sure it works when we're calling it from our front end. Okay. Okay, so let's see if this works. So create payment, execute payment. All right, open up Chrome. And let's go in here. Here it is here. My network tab is opened. And let's see if we get the proper response. So create payment. There we go, create payment working. And we can't execute it yet because that is called after this resolves. So this is good. Let's make this larger. So I'm just gonna paste in the setting that makes it bigger. So let's change it to large. Okay. So now we can install the PHP SDK. So this is the example page, which we'll make use of in a second. I still have to install it. So the instructions are here on the GitHub page, I think. No, they're not. Where are they? Installation. Okay. Composer. Okay, so it's just composer acquire. So let's do that. Okay, so that's done. Let's go back to the samples and let's take a look at this. There's two parts to it. Again, there's one part for creating the payment and there's one part for executing the payment. So this first one is for creating the payment. So I'm just going to grab all of this and make some slight modifications so it works in our app. But I'll go through the modifications after I paste everything in.
A few moments later.
Okay, so I basically took all of this and just pasted it in my code, but made some changes. So the first thing, as you can see, they're requiring this, and all this is doing is setting up the API credentials. So that's the first thing I did in here. So here's my client ID and here's my secret ID. And then this is the same. This is not necessary, but I just left it in there since it's already in the example. All this does is once you go into PayPal, once you click on this link and go into PayPal, you'll see line items in there, more specific line items specific to your order. So if you're doing this in your app, you would get this information from whatever is currently in the cart, but this is not necessary. So it's just setting 2 items. So this item has one quantity of 1 and has a price. This item has a quantity of 5 and there's the price. So that's $17.50 right now. And there's the item list. And then here, again, this is not necessary as well, but it's adding more detailed payment information. So this is adding shipping of $1.20 and tax of $1.30. So yeah, so the 2 items are $17.50, like I said, but $17.50 plus $2.50 is $20. So the total is being set down here, and the amount is necessary. And you have to make sure that the items and the totals add up. If they don't, then the API will throw an error. Transaction is necessary. It's setting the item list. Again, you don't need this, but it's in here. You have to set the amount. You don't have to set the description. And the invoice number, you can get this from your app as well. But here it's just using a random ID. You need the redirect URLs. And in our case, sorry, this is wrong. This should be Laravel, PayPal, example. And obviously in production, you would change this to your URL. And you can change this to a specific one to go to a cancel page if you wanted to, but I'm not doing that. And here's where you're setting up the new payment object. You're setting the payer, you're setting the redirect URLs, and you're setting the transactions. And this is what creates a payment. And if it's successful, then it just returns it. So we can see that in our network tab. And also from our client, I'm also console logging the response. So we should see that in the console and the network tab if we did this correctly. So back here, gonna refresh. Let's open up our network tab. Doesn't matter. Let's just leave it in the console, see if we get anything. And there's that response. So that should have gone through. Should have gone through in the network. Let's double check the network. Create payment. So same thing. Cool. Okay, now let's set up the the execute callback. So here in our client, it's just calling this endpoint, and it's passing in the payment ID and the payer ID. So let's go ahead and do that. And there's an example for that too in here. And that is right here. So here, execute after success, which is the next step. And I'm going to do the same thing, but remove what I don't need. So I'll be back when this is updated in the code. Okay, so I've gone through the code and I made some changes so it works with our code. So here they're using get variables, but in our case, if you look at the client side, we're posting to it. So we have to make sure we use post variables. So if you look here, they're using get variables. So I'm just grabbing it from the request here, right here, instead of get variables. And same for the payer ID. And this, I just commented out because what this is doing is it's adding a shipping cost after the user puts in their information. So the idea behind this is you have a price and then the person logs into their PayPal, they enter their address, and then you want to add another price on top of that because of their address and because that's the shipping cost. So that's what this does, but I want to keep it simple and just charge them the original amount. But you can do that if you like. And here is where we're executing the payment, passing through the execution object, which is here, and then passing in the API context, which we have up here again. And if I did this correctly, this should go through all the way and we should see our balance go down in our sandbox. So let's try this. Oh, hold on, one more thing. I also console logged the result here on the unauthorized method, and I put an alert once it's gone through, and I removed the console log from here. So now, if I did this correctly, it's PayPal checkout. And I think I forgot to show you this earlier, but this is the line items that we added from the other method from earlier. And again, this is not necessary, but it's nice. So the user knows what they're paying for. So let's continue. And let's put the order through. And there's that alert. There's the console log. So it looks like it went through. And if you look at the state and it was approved, it looks like it did go through. So again, in my sandbox here, and let's take a look if this goes down about $20 because this is in Canadian funds and it's $20 American. So there's a conversion. So it should be somewhere around 674-ish. So let me refresh that. So there you go. It went down 20. And this is not the one. There should be another one on top of this in a few minutes. This is just the one I tested right before. So there should be another 20 here in a few minutes, which I'll check in a second. So if you noticed in the checkout flow, there was an option. It said ship now. I'll show you. And in our case, or if you're just selling digital goods and there's no shipping, then we don't want that right here. We don't want to show this because if it's a digital good, then we're not shipping anything. So how do we remove that? So to remove that, go back into our code. And let's go back into our API in the create payment method. And right before we make a new payment, I'm going to paste in some code here. And you have to do this call, set no shipping on input fields. And then after that, we have to make a new web profile. And right here, I'm going to paste in another bit of code that adds that profile and allows you to remove that no shipping, or allows you to remove that shipping label. So yeah, that should do it. That should remove this ship to thing here. So I'm going to close this. I'm going to refresh. I'm going to try again. And I have an error. Sorry, I have to import input fields. Okay, try it again. Another error. Web profile I have to import. Okay, one more time. Another error. Web profile ID. Sorry, I forgot to paste in another line here. To be honest, I don't really know what this does. I just found this off a Stack Overflow thread, which just tried to remove the shipping. Okay, this should do it. Okay. And the ship to is gone. Awesome. So let's see if that original payment went through. So there should be 220s here on October the 20th, hopefully. And there we go. Cool. So yeah, a few more things I want to show you or take note of. There's this credit card generator tool for testing credit cards. So there's also an option. You can turn it off if you want, but it's on by default. Let me just log out here actually. So I'm going to log out here. But there's an option to pay with debit or credit card without having a PayPal account. So if this is on, then you can use this credit card generator and the flow will be the same. So yeah, you can make use of that if you want. And the other thing I want to mention is negative testing. So you should definitely test the negative cases as well. So go through this documentation and make sure you test the negative cases. To be honest, I haven't looked into it too much because it wasn't the easiest to do. For example, in Stripe, it's really easy. All you have to do is they give you a set of credit card numbers that will produce an error message and you can just test based on that. For here, you have to like set a header and I didn't find example code, so I didn't look too deeply into it, but definitely something you should look into if you're making it live for production. But yeah, I think I'll stop it here. I hope you got more insight on how to implement the PayPal checkout API with Laravel. Like I said earlier, we'll take a look at a more practical example in the next video where we'll use it on my Laravel e-commerce application. Please like, comment, and subscribe if you haven't already done so. Thanks for watching, guys. See you in the next one. Okay, thanks. Bye.